Hi folks, John Finley of Lemonade, CEO of Lemonade LXP. We're the all-in-one learning and knowledge platform for financial institutions. So today we're talking about the human firewall, specifically talking about the role of training in helping credit unions prevent cybersecurity breaches. So I wanted to start today's conversation by telling you a little bit of a bit of a story, particularly about my background, my experience with cybersecurity training. And sort of how I ended up delivering this presentation today. So my story starts back in 2012. So Employment and Social Development Canada is the single largest provider of services to Canadians within the Canadian government. And they suffered a security breach. And it was a pretty big one. So what happened was one of their staff members went to a coffee shop to work for the afternoon and did their work. And when they left, they forgot to bring an unencrypted zip drive. And what happened was someone at the coffee shop picked up that zip drive and then decided to leak its contents. And it turned out to be a pretty big deal because its contents were 533,000 student loan records, and that includes names, addresses, dates of birth, social security numbers, and loan balances. That's a lot of information about the customers, SDC's customers. It also contained 250 complete employee records. So another really big deal. And so what happened was the victims got together and started a class action suit. This is after the story made the media, and it was a pretty big deal. And so it made the media, attracted the attention of all the victims. They got together and created a class action suit. And ultimately, the government of Canada was on the hook for $17.5 million from that one tiny little mistake. So as you can imagine, this got the attention of the senior most folks in the department, and even all the way up to the minister level, because obviously it doesn't look good on an incumbent government to suffer such a large breach. And their next step was to commission Gartner Research to come in and do an analysis of why this happened. And so they wanted to understand, they obviously knew why it happened. Somebody left the zip drive, but they wanted to get to the reason of why that person would have thought it was acceptable to bring a zip drive with all those records off-site and on a zip drive, and that was unencrypted. And at the same time, they figured they'd look at their technology stack for protecting against breaches. So pretty expensive consulting expense for the government, and in the end, the number one thing that they recommend was that ESDC needed to improve staff training, awareness, and support. So this came as a little bit of a surprise to the folks at ESDC because they had been running cybersecurity training for years. The challenge was the training they were running was kind of like a fire drill. It was done once or twice a year, training folks on cybersecurity. And the challenge was the learning experience wasn't a great one. It was, read a PDF, answer some quiz questions, or it was sit in a classroom and have someone talk for a long time about cybersecurity. And there was some videos, but they were a little bit hokey. And so I think what happened was they had quite low engagement, people basically zipping through the training and ticking the boxes to get it done. And this led to low retention. After evaluating the efficacy of that training, they found that staff weren't really retaining the information. And so ultimately what that did was weaken ESDC's security posture. So at the time, I was running a promotions company. What we did was we built game-based digital promotions. So it was they were microsites with games and contests to educate consumers about big brands. And many times while we were running that business, our customers would say, what a great way to educate. Can you morph this game-based thing into an e-learning program, which we did many times. So a buddy of mine who was on the executive team at ESDC called me to say, we got a training problem, and I know you were telling me about these game-based learning things you're building for brands like Coca-Cola and Dell and Intel and so forth. would you come in and explain how they work? So I went into ESDC and I pitched them a more engaging modern learning experience using, amongst other things, game-based learning. So we ran a pilot program that was wildly successful, and then slated to be rolled out to the entire organization. But it proved out the use case of how to build more engaging training for this. So that's kind of how I ended up with a bit of an understanding, a little bit of a background in cybersecurity training. So now I want to shift gears to talk about cybersecurity training through the lens of a credit union. We sort of shifted away from our promotions company into Lemonade LXP, as I mentioned, all-in-one learning and knowledge platform for financial institutions. We brought that to market the end of 2018. And so we work with over 100 financial institutions. So we've got we've been exposed to the industry for quite a while, and we have a number of credit union customers. So I have a good sense of how that industry is working, particularly from a training perspective. So I want to dig into that a little bit. So why are credit unions unique targets? When I think about a government agency, it's obviously a unique target because of the richness of the records and so forth. But financial institutions are also very attractive targets. Credit unions, of course, are as well. And so the first thing is it's a trust-based service. So you guys have very strong relationships with members, and members trust you. And that trust is always something that can be taken advantage of. At the same time, you have complex digital systems, and that creates some vulnerabilities in the eyes of would-be cyber criminals. You also often have smaller teams, so a little bit strapped on resources. So the perception can be, well, there's not going to be quite as robust a defense system at a credit union as there might be at a national bank or something. The next thing is you guys, of course, house a lot of financial and personal data, which is very valuable on the market, on the dark market. So that makes you attractive. And the last one, I just think about this from my own perspective. If I were to decide to be a criminal, I'd be looking at a credit union because I know you've got more cash on hand than a convenience store. So if you're going to look at something to try to perpetrate a crime, you'd probably want people who have some deep pockets as well. So there's a lot of different reasons that credit unions are unique targets for would-be cyber criminals. So to combat that, of course, you guys have implemented a lot of different things to try to help overcome that. So you've got firewalls, you've got encryption tools, and you've got monitoring. And all sorts of rich tools to try to protect your tech stack. But the reality is technology protects your systems, which is great, but it's actually people that protect the outcomes. So let's dig into that a little bit, some of the data. So in 2024, 95% of all data breaches involved human error. So that's a pretty staggering number, but it tells you that humans are kind of that first weakness in your entire organizational firewall, if you will. The other interesting thing is that phishing is the number one attack vector for financial institutions. And that kind of makes sense too, because it's sort of the easiest way in through the door. And it's humans that are vulnerable in that case. So rather than trying to hack into complex digital systems, which not very many people have the skills to do, trying to fool a human being, a lot more people have the ability to do that. It takes less training, less technical understanding. So it makes sense that that's a viable option for would-be cyber criminals to get into your organization. And I know most financial institutions are actually doing things to train staff. It's not that the effort isn't there. The challenge is that often those training programs are generic, so they're not customized for your financial institution, because there may be policies and procedures that are different from standard ways of training people on cybersecurity, and you want it to reflect how you want people to behave. So generic training isn't always ideal. The next piece is staff perceive it as kind of checkbox driven. A lot of times, they just whip through it and tick the box to say they're done and they're finished, and that doesn't necessarily lead to effective results. The next thing is, in a lot of cases, it's periodic. So it might be once a quarter, it might be once a year, or once every 6 months, and that isn't necessarily ideal. The other limitation and why training tends to, so a lot of cybersecurity training tends to fall short is that it can be memorization based. And memorization doesn't necessarily lead to behavior change. In fact, in a lot of cases, it doesn't. Just memorizing something doesn't mean you've fully understood it, doesn't mean you've fully understood the implications of what you're learning and why it's important. So there's a lot of contextual stuff that gets lost if it's memorization based. The next thing is that it's often hard to understand the relevance of the training and put that in the context of your daily work. And that can be a challenging aspect for learners. You know, if you teach me about how to handle a specific type of document, but I don't understand the background, why it's important, what the risks are, all that kind of stuff, I might not understand how that really fits into my roles and responsibilities within the credit union. So I think those are kind of some of the limitations that we see. And the last one is often staff perceive that training is designed for auditors, not so much for human beings. So they would perceive that it's sort of, designed to help credit unions cover their behinds with regard to auditors, so that if you do suffer a breach, you can say, well, we did actually try to train our folks. And I think early cybersecurity training really was simply that, let's satisfy the auditors. But as the costs of breaches have started to mount, I think there is a more honest effort to make training that actually works. But still, it can be perceived in that way. The last piece I want to talk about is how people learn and what some of the limitations are. I don't know if you've ever had the experience where you're driving a friend home, they're giving you directions, and you get them home fine. But the next time you go to pick them up, you're on your own, you don't remember how to get there. And that's because when they were telling you, they were instructing you on how to get there, you kind of turn your brain off a little bit. And it's that lack of contextual learning. You're being told how to do something, and you're just relying on that guidance, not really understanding. And that's where I think a lot of cybersecurity training falls short. Is it's guidance, it's remember stuff, but not so much do. And I think that's where some of the limitations lie. So once you sort of fix the training side of things, I think culture is another really important element of your cybersecurity program. I think your cybersecurity program needs to make people feel safe in reporting mistakes. That's something we noticed at our organization in the early days when we first started to get into cybersecurity, is that folks were reluctant to talk about if they got caught in a phishing expedition, a phishing scam. They thought they'd get in trouble, and we had to make people realize that getting caught, yeah, that's unfortunate. But the most important thing is that our tech folks understand that immediately, so we can mitigate the potential damage of any mistake that's being made. So that's the first piece. I think the next one is making people understand that security is everyone's job. So people don't just look and say, well, that's the tech guys, the cybersecurity guys, that's their problem, not mine. No, it's everybody's, because everybody is a potential risk vector. So that we have to have a culture like that. And the last one is that learning never stops. And the reason for that is the nature of the threats change so quickly, almost daily in some cases. New scams are coming out, new technology coming out to try to break into systems, new tactics used by cyber criminals. We constantly have to be learning. It's kind of like the WADA trying to stay ahead of athletes and doping. The potion changes so regularly, it's very difficult for the police to look at that and stay ahead of the drug thing. It's the same thing with cybersecurity. And the last piece is the analogy I use is like cybersecurity it's a team sport. Everybody has to contribute, and everybody has to be sort of rowing the same race. And in team sports, you got to train to be good. And you don't just train once a year or once a quarter, you train every day. And so we have to view it like that. So let's jump in to talk a little bit about how humans actually learn. This is a famous photograph. It's Michael Jordan shooting over Byron Russell to win the Bulls' sixth championship. And to me, this picture tells more than a championship story. It tells a story of the importance of of training and how you train. Michael Jordan was notorious for getting to practice early and leaving practice late so that he could shoot extra shots. And if you look at his form on this particular picture, it's perfect. He's square to the basket. He's releasing through the triangle with his middle finger, all the basketball stuff. I'm getting a little nerdy, but it is a perfect looking shot. And that didn't just happen in that moment. That happened in the thousands of shots that guy took before and after practice and in games and so forth. So when the moment came, the biggest moment on the biggest stage, he was able to perform because he'd done it so many times before. So repetition to me is such a crucial element of how we learn. Being able to do something over and over and execute at the same time, super important. The next one I think is very important is practice under pressure. Using that basketball analogy, and when I was playing basketball, I would often have a shot clock running in my head, counting down 10, 9, 8, 7 to put pressure on myself so that when I shot that shot at the buzzer, I got used to feeling that pressure. There are so many ways that we can create that, but I think that's the kind of thing that we want to do with our training programs, to introduce that pressure moment for our staff so that they can react when it matters the most. I think ultimately what we're trying to create is a situation where, let's say it's a teller or frontline staff member who has a customer coming in and their actions don't seem right. Something seems off. We want to teach that staff member to slow down. We want to teach them to ask questions. And through doing that, through slowing down and asking those questions, they'll have the ability to spot red flags and potentially ward off threats while they're happening, as opposed to after the mistake has happened. And I think that if we can do that, we can reduce risk in practice. And so we can have fewer successful phishing attacks. We can have faster incident reporting. And we can have ultimately a better security posture. And that's all done through training and culture that allows us to build a human firewall, essentially, that will protect the organization. And I think as leaders, what we want to ask is, would our people recognize an attack today? And if the answer to that is no, then we've got some work to do. But the work is worthy because it really provides an opportunity. Because if you have great training and you can create preparedness amongst your organization, and you can show that you can protect members against potential financial fraud and security issues, I think you can turn security into a competitive advantage. So how do we do that? First thing is, I think our training needs to be bite-sized and it needs to be regular. Don't give them hordes of information they need to learn and understand. Just give them little bits at a time and make it regular, as frequently as a short little splash of training every day. That can keep it top of mind and make that stuff easier to digest. I mentioned early in the presentation how effective the game-based approach can be, making it fun, making it challenging, and introducing some pressure through putting timers, things like that make it a little bit more stressful. You can create those virtual moments. Also, I think we want to have realistic phishing and fraud exercises so that staff become aware of what those look like and understand how to spot them long before they come. And the last piece is in the flow support. No matter how good our training is, we are on occasion going to forget things that we learned, and we need the ability to ask a question when we see something that looks suspicious. And I think with new technology out there, we can not only deliver effective training, but also provide that inflow support that will help staff members when they need it the most. Okay, so that's kind of the approach. What I'd love to do now, I'm just going to take a few minutes to show you a modern cybersecurity training approach in action. It should just take a few minutes. I'm going to show you some stuff that we're doing in Lemonade LXP, not really as a product pitch. These are ideas you can take away and do on your own, but it gives you an idea of what a modern cybersecurity training approach might look like. So here I want to show you a modern approach to cybersecurity training and support. What you're looking at here is the main interface of Lemonade LXP. And I show this to you because modern training requires that you educate your staff not just on cybersecurity basics that sort of apply to all credit unions, but also one's cybersecurity as it relates to your policies and procedures and how you want to handle situations. So the ability to customize that training is really important. And Lemonade gives you that ability. So what you can do here is you can go over to configuration, and at the click of a button, I can create a private secure knowledge base. I've already created one, so I'll show it to you. That allows me to drag and drop files in virtually any format. And so you can see here, I've got a whole bunch of different files dropped in. Here's one specific to cybersecurity, and there's a bunch of other ones in there about cybersecurity. And once I'm done, I can click synchronize, and it creates a knowledge base. With that knowledge base, I can then start to educate and support staff. So I can go in here, and at the click of a button, I can create a module or a bucket into which I can put some training content or create some training content. So here I call it cybersecurity. I go over to author, and I can author a collection. So I'm going to author one called Phishing Intro Defense. I write my prompt here, and then I click save, and I go to synthesis where I click fetch source text. And what it does is it reads all of the documentation related to cybersecurity in the knowledge base that we created, and it creates a consolidated article, which I can then read and make sure it's accurate. It'll even show me what documents it referenced, and then I click author, and it creates content for me. So that's how fast AI can author your content. Let's go over and take a look at the content that it authored. So the first thing was we wrote a script for and put it into a third-party video editor. We didn't create our own video editor because there's so many good ones out there. But the first thing it created was a short video introducing the course. And so here it is.
Hey there, I'm Lenny. Welcome to your phishing defense training. In this course, we're going to sharpen your instincts so you can spot scams before they cause problems.
So I won't go through the whole video, but that's just a little intro. The second thing that it authored, some folks prefer to read. So it actually authored an article on phishing defense. So specific, welcome to the world of phishing. Why is phishing important? The psychology behind it, how it's evolving, spotting the hooks, that sort of thing. A full article giving you all the details you need to know about phishing. Next, it gets into some game-based learning. So this, again, authored in minutes with Insight AI, creates a game-based learning module where there's an intro paragraph. It says, phishing presents a significant risk to credit unions because it exploits, and there's a mistake nested in. And I actually have to find those mistakes and correct them. And since I created this module, I actually know what the answers are. But you can see here I'm correcting them. I've got 5 lives to figure it out. If I lose my life, like I make a mistake, you'll see that I lose a life. It gives me a feedback loop. But it challenges me to read that. So for any long form content, I actually have to read it and understand it. I can't just tick boxes that says I understood it. So then I can look and I can create modules that actually show me live phishing examples. So here's an example of a text coming in. It says your bank just texted you, but is it actually from your bank? And then it teaches you to spot the signs in this approach that indicate that this might actually not be legitimate. So this is that hands-on approach where I need to spot the opportunities and learn from them. So it gives you a very sort of modern approach to training that's got some game-based, it's got some foundational information, some video, and some actual live spot the problems type training. So that is the learning that you can create, and there's all sorts of different modules you can create, but that's one example. But as I mentioned in the presentation, a lot of times folks will forget what they learned. And so there's an Ask AI feature that allows me to ask a question. So I'll ask it a question. I received an email that looks a lot like a phishing attempt, period. How can I make sure that I don't get caught up in this scam? So now what it's doing, it's querying that database we created, all the documentation that I showed you initially. And so it's going to look at that information and read it and pull out the answer. So it'll give me guidance on how to spot a phishing attempt if there is one. So here is my answer, and it even references the training modules. So here, a phishing attempt, I can actually go and click on here and it'll take me to the exact module that shows me how I might want to look at that email and see if it looks like a phishing attempt. So you can see here that it's walking me through and saying what looks bad and what doesn't look bad. So that answer is really comprehensive. Gives me a comprehensive answer, references all the documents that it pulled information from, and I can download the source material, and references all the training. So that's modern. You know, you can see you got a problem, you can see it in the flow of work, and you can get an answer in the flow of work. The last piece is you can take your training content that you created for your staff and you can make it member facing. So here is a branded searchable WCAG compliant hub. That same content that I create, I can either create dedicated content for members or I can leverage content that I created for staff, all using that AI authoring tool. So here I can go and see I created some phishing content to educate members. So this will help members understand if they're getting phished. So here's an example of it member facing. And with member facing, it actually has AI voice as well to guide them through. So check it out.
Phishing emails often appear legitimate at first, but oftentimes the contents of the email will help with identifying whether or not it's actually legitimate. The overall tone of these types of emails comes across as both urgent and threatening. Scammers do this in the hopes you'll panic and react without thinking first.
So we won't go through the whole thing, but suffice to say, a modern approach allows you to educate staff, support staff when they have questions, and also roll out training to help protect members. And that shows that dedication to cybersecurity and to protecting your members that can then become a competitive advantage for your credit union. So that's a quick demo. I don't want to burden you with too much information about Lemonade LXP because this isn't meant to be a demo, but it gives you an example of the type of learning modules that would be included in a modern cybersecurity training approach. So that's it for today's presentation. Thank you very much for joining. I hope this was valuable for you. Thank you very much for attending.